The following program is produced by Londonderry residents. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily the views and opinions of the LACTV staff or its volunteers, and should not be considered an endorsement by CTV20 or its staff and volunteers.
Well, hello, Londonderry. Welcome to another edition of Concord Conversations. I'm your host, Doug Thomas, today. My co-host is Wayne McDonald, and we have the town manager, Mr. Mike Malaguti, as our guest today. Before we go into what we'll be talking about today, I just want to say a few words. Thoughts and prayers go out to the folks in West Maui and Maui of all their fires. The town of Lahaina is completely gone. I was supposed to be there this week. Obviously, I canceled. Total devastation. Our hearts and prayers go out to all the folks that lost their homes and businesses and their lives as well. In addition, we want to put our prayers out to the folks in Canada, West Canada, Northwest Canada, which are suffering from massive fires as well. So our thoughts are with those people as well. So as we said before, the premise of our show is to talk about town, county, and state issues. Today, we have the opportunity to discuss a very recent town issue, near and dear to people's hearts, and that is the recent letters that went out on the town's new assessments. That's why we have our town manager, Mr. Mike Malaguti, with us. Before we go into that, I'll turn it over to Wayne. Wayne, do you have any introductory words about today's show?
Well, I hope everyone, first of all, I hope everyone's enjoying their summer. If you're like me, you're bemoaning the fact that it's winding down. It's one of the casualties of New England, I guess. But looking forward in many ways to getting back into legislative business in Concord, as well as the ongoing issues here in Londonderry, the ongoing important business of our town. A lot of I'm trying to remember the term all of a sudden. Committees to study bills. What's the Representative Thomas? Help me with this.
LSRs, you're talking about the...
No. Basically, we have a lot of committees coming up to study a lot of issues. 14 retained bills in my committee, for example, and
other commissions.
I suspect you have a few as well. So that's something we're going to be working on this fall. There's no more legislative sessions as such planned until the beginning of next year. But again, we're here today to talk about town issues, and just as the business of the state is very important, certainly the business of our community is very, very important to all of us. And Mike, I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls probably about the recent letters that went
Mike,
out
I was
on the
going to say, this is, I also received a letter in the mail too.
You got yours.
I
didn't dare to bring mine.
From the assessing department, and it'd be great if you were going to sell your house right away, but not so good when it comes time for taxes. So we'd like to find out what happened. People are very upset, they're very concerned, and as you know, we have a large population of fixed income people, and we need to find out why, wherefore, and what we can do about it.
Exactly right. Well, first of all, Doug and Wayne, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak about this important issue. You're exactly right. I think there isn't anything that generates quite as much buzz around town and town hall as the revaluation that takes place now every 2 years. This is a complicated issue, the way that we end up with a tax bill. And our tax bills go out in July and December, as everyone knows. And there are a lot of moving pieces. But the long and the short of it is, just as is stated in the letter, the valuation is only one piece of how we end up with that tax bill. The other piece, obviously, is the tax rate. And it's a little bit funny. I mean, I guess it's typical of municipal government that those two factors are not on the same timeline. What happens at this time of year is for the last year, and effective April 1st, that's the date that we're trying to value, the assessing department has been hard at work coming up with a set of preliminary values. And that's what is reflected in the letters that have gone out to our taxpayers. The next step in that process is for the opportunity to have informal hearings with the assessing department. That is something that we have not always done, and it's something that for this cycle and for the last cycle has been extremely beneficial, because it's really the last stage in the valuation process that's taking place. It provides the assessing department the opportunity to discuss concerns that homeowners may have about that valuation. Maybe there's a shed that was taken down last year and should be taken out of the assessment valuation. Maybe a measurement was incorrect. And so it really is an opportunity for adjustments to be made if there are concerns. And last time we had several hundred people, I believe, take advantage of the opportunity to sit down with representatives of the assessing department to address those concerns. As is stated in the letter, an increase in valuation does not necessarily equate to a larger tax bill, because, as I said, there are two factors at play, really more, but I'll speak about that in a minute. The second factor is the tax rate, and because we do our valuation per $1,000 of value, it's really important that we figure out what that tax rate is. And of course, it has four component parts. The largest being the school tax, the local education tax, and that's about 67% of the tax bill that residents pay. And the second being the town municipal tax, and that's about 23%. So the tax rate is set, as I said, on a different schedule than the valuation that's taking place. And the last important information that we need to have in order to set the tax rate is what's going on with state revenues, highway block grant, rooms and meals tax, because those are revenues that get factored into the tax rate and will affect it up or down. The other thing that happens in the late fall is, in addition to getting the state revenue information, the town council has the opportunity to use what's called the budgetary use of fund balance. And that is to take fund balance that is on hand and use it to lower the tax rate if the town council decides to do that. So once those things are done, we have a tax bill, and the tax bills go out in December. The way tax bills work is the first tax bill that goes out in July is an estimate. It's 1/2 of last year's tax bill. And then the bill that goes out in December is the true up. And so that's, in a nutshell, how we end up with a tax bill in Londonderry.
You said there were four components to the tax rate, four considerations. You mentioned the school, you mentioned the town, the county also figures in.
County also.
And what was the fourth one?
It would be the state education tax.
Okay. Great, thanks.
So I think the important thing that you brought up is that the town can set its tax rate, but does this also, what you mentioned about the town council and looking at the grants that might be coming in and any other income that might be coming in from the state, does that affect the school portion of the tax?
Well, so the school is going through its own similar process. And on the school side, there are monies that are coming in from the state and potentially from the federal government as well that will affect their tax rate in exactly the same way. The school, uses our valuation. We're the government that does the valuation, but they have some open questions as we move towards the end of the year that go into factoring that tax rate on the school side as well.
So explain why, after so many years, a few years ago, the town decided to go to a 2-year assessment versus 5 years. That people are wondering, is it just a way that the town can get more money faster, or is it truly a way that we can ease the tax burden long term?
That's a great question. And I get that question a lot as well. And the answer is that by statute, we have to do at least a 5-year revaluation, but we can do it more frequently. And the cycle before this, the town council decided that it made sense to go to a 2-year revaluation. Looking at this broadly, if money were no object, we would be revaluing people's property annually or more frequently than annually because we want the truest possible value. And of course, people's valuation goes up and down based on market conditions. But what was happening with the 5-year revaluation was there's a process that's happening in the background, and that is when you buy or sell a house, you have to file paperwork with the Department of Revenue Administration, and you send a copy of that paperwork to the municipal assessor. And what that paperwork has is information about what people are buying and selling their houses for. And are there factors or characteristics that may affect the value and make it something more or less than the fair market value? So the assessors are getting that information every day in the assessing department, and so is the Department of Revenue Administration. And what the Department of Revenue Administration is doing is it's taking that information on a yearly basis and equalizing the value of municipalities. So it's going town by town, city by city, and determining the value that's on the books, the value that was last determined through revaluation. How is that stacking up to what we're seeing in real time with sales information? And what we were finding was that, particularly in a down market, that the value that we were carrying on the books was higher, actually, at times than what we were seeing in the sales data. And so, we don't want that because people were being taxed on value that wasn't there anymore. And so that's one benefit to doing this more frequently is we're not exposed to abatements if the assessed values are percentages higher than what we're seeing in the sales data. The other reason to do it is if we're doing it every 5 years, people are seeing reflected a potentially very large increase in valuation, very large, all at once, and that can be a problem. I think that this is something that people are always concerned about when they get a notice from the assessor saying your value's changed. But what I would emphasize is this is something that, as I said, is only one half of the picture, and we don't have the full picture until the tax rate is finalized in the fall. There are those informal hearings that people can take advantage of, but they don't have to. If somebody has a concern about evaluation, they have until March 1st after they receive their tax bill to file an abatement. And I can tell you that the town grants abatements when it needs to. I can tell you that the town makes adjustments based on the informal hearings. So it really is a process. And the assessing department, what impresses me about assessors is they're all about the data. The more data and information they can have, the better. And that goes right down to measuring the configuration of somebody's house or somebody's deck. Going out and putting eyes on properties, that's actually happening in the background as well. It's called cyclical revaluation. And the assessing department is going out and putting eyes on about 20% of the town each year to get updated information about the condition of the property. Maybe something's been removed, maybe something's been added. And that's an important part as well, in addition to the 2-year revaluation that's taking place.
Well, at one time, wasn't the requirement every 10 years, and then they would change it to 5? Or?
That could be. You've been at this a bit longer than I have, but certainly for as long as I've been involved in municipal government, it's been 5 years.
And how long have you been involved?
Well, I started off doing legal work for the town in 2018. As you know, I started off as the prosecutor for the police department and doing more and more municipal work all the way until February of last year when I took over as town manager.
So at least for the last 5 years, it's been
Correct.
5 years. Okay.
So one thought that comes to mind is, in this current environment of inflation, skyrocketing grocery costs, gas costs, far outstripping people's increase in their salaries, how do you balance the potential tax increase so it in itself does not outstrip people's ability to pay with their lack of keeping up with their salaries?
Sure.
Is there a way the town can look at that so they could say because of inflation, food costs are up so much, so our taxes may have to go up as much, but yet people's salaries don't.
Yeah.
So, and we don't want people to be caught like that. Is there a way that we can mitigate that?
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, I think pretty much everybody sees how much more food and gas and all those things cost today than they did a year ago. I would emphasize a couple of things. One is, the town only raises so much money, and I say only raises so much money. It's a significant amount, but it doesn't go up based on a change in valuation. So even though values may be changing, the town, that's not money that the additional money that the town wants or that the town is getting. And so that it's important to understand that if you do see your tax bill going up or down, it's less because, at least on the town side, the budgetary request is increasing, but more based on how your valuation is behaving compared to your neighbors. It's all about how much share of the tax burden individual taxpayers are bearing. That being said, it's important that we keep our budgetary house in order. And on the town side, what we've done for the last 5 years is, under the Taxpayer Relief Act, put at least $200,000 at the tax rate from fund balance at the end of the year. That is money that we do not need to raise through taxation, and it serves to keep the tax rate in check. The other thing I would say is, when I took over as town manager, I thought it was important that we look not only at the budget, right? We've got the budget, which together with the sewer fund is something around $40 million. We need to also look at those separate spending requests, the warrant articles, because in the past, what we've tended to do is just to look at the budget and compare last year's budget to this year's budget. I think it's really important that we compare all of the money that we're asking the taxpayers to spend, and not just look at that budgetary number. And in doing that last year, what I'm proud of is we made a total spending request, when you include those warrant articles, that was something like $16,000 higher than the year before. So we were able to find within our budget hundreds of thousands of dollars of the same inflationary cost increases that homeowners are seeing. Those are really important things as well. And then there's something that I think you both had a hand in, and that is returning revenues to municipalities in badly needed areas. That happened last year when we received our first one-time payment of additional highway block grant and municipal bridge aid. That came out to close to $1 million last year, and that was $1 million that we didn't need to ask our taxpayers to fund. The number of our second one-time highway block grant and municipal bridge aid was something around $300,000 this past year. But that's in addition to all of the highway block grant and municipal bridge aid that we're already receiving. So those dollars go a long way, particularly when we have hundreds of road miles and our roads are on a 60, 70 year pavement and replacement cycle.
Well, you bring about one point where perhaps I already know the answer, but for the benefit of our audience, I'll ask it. Many times I've seen many people will write and say, hey, the state gave the town back so many dollars, that should decrease our taxes for this year. Why doesn't it? Because it doesn't really, but there's a reason why. If the town gets $1 million more, should the taxes be $1 million less, and therefore people get a less of a tax bill this coming year? What's the theory behind that, and why don't you think that works?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think a couple things. One is, our fund balance. We need to watch after our fund balance as well. And fund balance is something that people have strong feelings about. People look at it as the taxpayer's savings account, and in many ways that's true, but I think it's a bit of an oversimplification. That money is important because we're a fairly large operation, and cash flow, believe it or not, affects us the same way it affects households. And so having a healthy fund balance that's in line with DRA standards and GFOA standards is really important. GFOA is the governmental accounting group. Fund balance is also important because it, in a time of high interest rates, has allowed us to achieve hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest revenue. And all of that interest revenue is money that is used to either lower the tax rate, or that we don't have to ask taxpayers for at the end of at come budget time. So those are some of the reasons that money back from the state doesn't just get passed through to taxpayers. Some of the money that we get from the state has a restricted purpose, such as highway block grant or municipal bridge aid. We can't use municipal bridge aid to pay salaries. And I think this highlights something important, and that is, the legislature identified areas that have been undervalued, I think, for years in a lot of different municipalities. And that's because, we're a pretty, I think in New Hampshire, we're pretty lean, rightfully so, at the municipal level. And so projects do get put off. Paving projects do get put off. The Harvey Road culvert got put off until we could save up enough money to fund that. And so, when those dollars do come through from Concord, they get put into areas of dire need in terms of roadway and bridge projects.
Is it fair to say taxes would be even higher if that money didn't come through?
Exactly right. Exactly right. The other thing I would mention is, the town received a significant allocation of ARPA money. And we're still going through the process of trying to determine how to spend that ARPA money. It's been used to support our public safety departments. And similar to what I said about roadway and bridge funding, our public safety departments have projects that are really important to them that, trying to look after their own budgets have been deferred. And so some of those dollars have been put into those projects, and that's exactly where they belong.
Well, some of those projects hopefully will involve water.
Exactly right. Yes, that's another prime area of potential use for ARPA money. The water problem I could talk about for the next 3 hours, but I'll give you a little summary. Obviously, there's a PFAS contamination problem in town, but there's also a supply problem. There's also an arsenic problem. And while PFAS is the emerging contaminant that we are worried about today, in 5 years, it's going to be something else. I don't know what it is, but it'll be something else. And so getting clean, plentiful drinking water out to our residents is a matter of the highest priority. Unfortunately, it's also a matter of the highest cost. And in Londonderry, we don't have a fully built-out water system. We have to go at it stepwise, I think, and we've identified some problems, some potential projects where we can leverage ARPA money, Drinking and Groundwater Trust Fund money to make the biggest impact. I'm hopeful that through our cooperation with the Department of Environmental Services and also through the advocacy of our representatives in Concord, that we're going to start to make some significant progress on this water issue.
Is it fair to say that, you mentioned a number of the efforts in terms of how cost savings are achieved, how money is allocated. Is it also fair to say that the continual expansion of the tax base with the Woodmont project, for example, and everything, it's just one of the many ways that the town and the town council and yourself, for example, also are trying to keep costs down as much as possible, tax rate down as much as possible, and address the challenges of running the community?
I'm so glad you raised that, because economic development is something that is really important to the town council. It's something that's really important to me. But for exactly the reason that you identified, we don't seek economic development just for economic development's sake. We seek it in appropriate areas because it benefits every residential taxpayer. For every $100,000 that we collect from New Balance or EFI or UPS Pratt Whitney or from Granite Ridge Energy, that's $100,000 less that we have to ask our taxpayers for at home. And we're blessed in Londonderry with a couple of prime industrial areas that really have served to keep our tax rate in check. And that is the Pettingill Road area that you mentioned, as well as Woodmont Commons. Woodmont Commons is ready to take off. We've solved some infrastructure problems, sewer and water, that have plagued that project for years. And we did it through cooperation with the developer, but also leveraging our relationships with Representative Pappas and other folks in Washington to get about $4 million worth of infrastructure dollars into that project. You've probably seen in the news recently a lot of activity on Pettingill Road. New Balance is coming to town. We were able to attract New Balance to town through our commercial and industrial tax incentive program. That's a program that I think is going to drive that kind of high-end growth in the Pettingill Road area and potentially in the Woodmont area and the 4A area for years. And we expect that the New Balance plant is going to be valued at something around $20 to $25 million. So even through that incentive, we are going to be receiving from New Balance millions of dollars over the next decade that we're not going to have to ask our residential taxpayers for.
I'd like to get back one more thing involving the tax revenue and the assessment values. We have just a couple of minutes left. We have people are hurting in this town, and their taxes keep going up. Are there ways for certain groups of people to go to the town to get maybe some relief on their property tax? And if so, how do you get that message out? Because we still have hard to believe, we still have people out there that don't have computers, they don't go to websites, they still try to read papers. How do we get that word out so people know? I know people that they don't know, or they're too afraid to ask. So how do we get these people some relief? Because this is hurting people.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that exactly as you point out, Doug, people access information in different ways. And people read the newspaper, they interact with Facebook. Some people who are younger than me are using Instagram. I can't say I know much about that. But we need to find people where they are. And I think that going out to 55 plus communities, going out to all-American assisted living and giving information about the options is something that we've talked about and something that we're looking at. We did something similar last year with the Forest Hills development. You may recall that there were some issues with how we were assessing and valuing certain 55 plus communities. And we went out there, the assessor and I, the day after I took over as town manager, and we helped people fill out abatement requests, and we took questions about that valuation process from very concerned citizens. That kind of interaction is really important. There are options available. There is the informal hearing route that I mentioned. There is the abatement route. There is a tax deferral option that would allow elderly residents to defer taxes if they are having difficulty paying them. And there are other exemptions, of course, that we've looked at recently and updated. The veterans exemption, the elderly exemption. And we're looking at always not only the eligibility requirements for those exemptions, but also the benefit, the amount of the benefit and the extent of the benefit. So that's a really important part of this.
Good. Well, we just have a few seconds left. Wayne, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
By the way, my earlier comments, subcommittee is the term I was looking for. But I want to thank Mike for being here with us today. Again, it's a critically important issue, the whole, the assessment, and thank you for clarifying so many parts of that. It's a lot more to it, and I learned some more about it that I didn't know. So again, thank you, Mike, and always, thank all of you for watching.
Yes, thank you again. This is Concord Conversation. Our premise is talk about town, county, and state issues. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, you have a good morning or a good evening.
The preceding program was produced by Londonderry residents. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily the views and opinions of the LACTV staff or its volunteers and should not be considered an endorsement by CTV 20 or its staff and volunteers.